Well, the entire issue of climate has been one that's really dominated the B20 process. And when one looks at climate and one looks at B20, there's the entire issue of financing decarbonization, the transfer of green technology, the entire issue of who actually pays for it. It's also about upskilling and reskilling businesses around the world to ensure that when one speaks about sustainable environmental growth, that these are matched by actual practices on the ground, because if that doesn't happen, this is just a talk shop, which is what we don't want it to be. We've got a wonderful guest with us. Dr. Arunava Majumdar is Dean of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. Thanks very much for being with us. You were there, when the Prime Minister spoke, and he spoke about green credits. We've seen carbon credits in the past. Now he's referred to green credits. How is this possibly an important suggestion?
Vishnu, thank you for having me on your show. First of all, I must say that a very impressive speech by the Prime Minister, very inspiring and energetic. I think one has to look at it, step back from some of the details and ask the question, how big a transition is this? This is the biggest transition humanity has ever done, because you're changing from a 20th century economy that is based on fossil fuels, that is leading to climate change, burning of fossil fuel, to something that is a clean economy. And given the scale of the population that we have and the scale of a $100 trillion global economy, this is the biggest change we've ever seen. So in this process, one has to incentivize and reinforce the right steps one has to take, and penalize some of the wrong steps that people will take. What the Prime Minister is saying, green credits, is like, let's reinforce the right behavior. And that is going green, that is going renewables, that is going carbon free. And I think that's what he's trying to say. And this is a step in the right direction because it incentivizes, it promotes and reinforces the right kind of behavior. That's what he's saying. But I think this one has to step back and look at the biggest transition humanity has ever done.
Right.
And this will change, this will affect every human being.
Yeah.
And it's not just about decarbonization, it is about adaptation.
Yeah.
And because climate change is here.
Yeah.
People out in the global south feel it much more in the heat waves and the humidity waves, loss of agriculture and all of that. Given all of that, the adaptation, the food security, the water security, the heat security, etc., these are very, very important issues in addition to the decarbonization.
India seems to be doing reasonably well in meeting, our goals towards Paris. In terms of solar, we've gone far ahead than what many had projected a few years back. There is active talk on, let's say, green hydrogen as well. So in terms of what India's stated goals are, and they're ahead of what many countries are presently, are you encouraged by the process?
I'm encouraged by a lot of things going on out here. First of all, the landing on the moon. As someone who was born and brought up out here, went through high school and college and everything, it just makes all of us feel so proud of the fact that it landed on the south pole of the moon. But I said this on stage yesterday as well. If you go back in history and ask the question, what happened in the United States when President Kennedy in 1962 went, we chose to go to the moon and return safely? It was obviously they landed on the moon and came back, but in addition to that, there were a lot of other innovation that happened around the same time. Lasers got invented, wireless communication, cellular communication, Bell Laboratories, with DARPA, internet got invented, network distributed computing. All of that happened at the same time. So it was intensity and innovation that happened. And I think we are seeing the early days of the landing on the moon as a signature of a larger innovation play that India is going into. And I think it's just heartwarming to see that, because the potential of the capacity of the people out here and the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that is in place, I think now we can build on that. And I think India is showing the way in many ways.
Yeah. A couple of points about cutting down on carbon emissions. There's batteries, and batteries are so important in terms of electric mobility. But the cost of batteries is still far too expensive, not just in India, but around the world, number one. Number two, we talk about green hydrogen, but it's extremely expensive, and there's the entire issue of safety as well. And so there's an interim solution, which is blended fuels. And I know I'm mixing up a lot of key technologies over here, but what in your mind is the roadmap to sort of getting this done?
So first of all, I think every country will start from a different initial condition. will have different boundary conditions. So every country has to chart its own path. India will chart its own path. And the transition to electrification is a multiple play. It's air pollution. It is getting away from foreign oil imports. I mean, there's a lot of play out here. And I think, the battery costs are high, but they're coming down. They've come down a lot, more than people had expected 10 years ago. And so now, with the batteries coming down, in a few years, we can expect the range and the cost of electric vehicles to be competitive and maybe even lower than the gasoline or petroleum-based cars, right? And so, and it's much easier to drive, it's lower maintenance. So I think there are a lot of benefits that will come out of the electrification of transportation, and at least the light-duty transportation. The heavy duty is a different ballgame, right? In terms of fuel, yes, hydrogen, first of all, in addition to electricity, you need a fuel.
Yes.
The economy cannot do without a fuel. And so the fuel out here, in this case, is either coal or hydrogen. Hydrogen can be produced from electricity, right? Or hydrogen can be produced from other means.
Yes.
The carbon footprint of that is very important.
Yes.
And the cost, as you pointed out, is really important because it is more expensive to split water and produce hydrogen. So that requires incentives. The United States has created the Inflation Reduction Act that provides incentives to create more technology to bring down the cost. And that is what is needed. It is about scale. And as you scale more, the learning curves will happen and the cost will come down. So that's the direction that all countries should be going, and India is certainly going in that direction.
We need to skill and reskill to meet sustainable development targets, right? I mean, jobs have to keep the environment in mind, the climate in mind. Is that not an essential part of the way forward?
Absolutely. In fact, when I would say this is such a big transition in the economy that new educational modes are needed, new skill sets are needed. And if you don't have the workforce, it's going to be a huge problem. So I think in addition to the technology, in addition to the financing that you pointed out, I think workforce development, fundamental education in what issues related to the new economy, whether it's clean economy, green or water purification or agricultural practices, all of these, the education is needed. And I'm in an educational institution, so our goal is to develop that education system not only for our own students, we're going to make it available for free for the rest of the world, because we think that that is a fundamental need for all societies.
You know, when we began this interview, you spoke about extreme events. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because we've just gone through the hottest July and possibly the hottest August as well, the hottest June and certainly the hottest July. We've gone through floods in India in just the last couple of weeks. We've had extreme weather patterns in the Arabian Sea and cyclones of much greater intensity than in the past. And we've gone through drought in some areas, or almost drought in some areas, and too much rainfall in others. What is this all a part of?
Well, this is about climate change. Climate change is not in the future, it's here. And it is likely to get worse. This is not going to get better. So I think you're exactly right. The global south will face more of these extreme events than the global north. It's just because we are in the tropics out here. And I think one has to look at that very carefully, as the Prime Minister talked about, that in addition to the decarbonization of our economy, that's a business opportunity that needs to be done, but it's not an either or. In addition to that, in parallel, we need to look at adaptation. We need to look at financing homes that are more resilient, right? If 8% of the Indian population has access to air conditioning, 8%. When you have a heat and humidity wave, that people will die if you don't have the right kind of housing or right kind of, maybe there's a warehouse that is air conditioned so that when the heat and humidity wave happens, they can come there and assemble and get through this, ride through these events that are happening. There are sea level rises, and there are a lot of people who live in the coastal communities. It's not just fisheries going away. It is actually the sea level rise can happen, especially during hurricanes and cyclones and all of that. And so all of that needs to be the adaptation of food. When the temperature goes up, the food productivity goes down. Right? And then the preservation of food, the supply chains of food, water, drought issues. So all of these have to be addressed in a systemic way,
Yeah.
so that the people, at the end of the day, our communities need to be safe.
Sure. Professor Majumdar, wonderful speaking to you. Thank you so much indeed. Well, there you have it. A look at what B220 really needs to focus on. Climate change is upon us. We see this on a very regular basis. The entire issue of who finances decarbonization around the world, the adoption of new technologies, meeting targets which have been set up internationally. Because if we don't do this now, then it's becoming much harder for all of us, billions across the world. It's back to the studio.